Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX14 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new World of Warships gameplay today on our channel. In this episode I'm sailing out a new Tier 10 Soviet gunboat destroyer known as the Khabarovsk in a domination game on the map Mountain Range. The purpose of today's gameplay is for me to use this to provide you with an informal review of the ship in my experience. And I'd like to start off with the concept of this being the top tier ship in the gunboat line within the Soviet destroyer tech tree. The phrase gunboat in particular means that this ship focuses very heavily on its artillery pieces and the ability to deal damage over the course of the game through raw alpha damage with high explosive and armour piercing shells, along with setting fires using high explosive to bleed the health out of battleships in particular. So our focus needs to be on game longevity rather than having a sudden impact like a destroyer would in the ambusher role and using its torpedoes to eliminate a big ship, or alternatively trying to cripple our opponents with an array of citadels in a short period of time. By staying alive for longer, we hope to be able to maximise our damage output and the impact on the game. Now it's because of that, this blends in very importantly to the concept of this not being a destroyer as such, but a gunboat that taps into destroyer-like qualities at certain points in the match. And in the early game, I feel you have to forget about those destroyer qualities, such as contesting caps early on, because whilst your concealment is good compared to ships you can encounter, for concealment of a destroyer, the concealment is extremely poor. Your detectability by sea, as seen here, is 9.7 km and by air 4.9 km if you're going for a dedicated gunboat build. And even if you go for a concealment build, you won't be getting your concealment below approximately 7.7 km, which means there's going to be a distance of approximately 2 km in which the enemy destroyers that you'll see at tier 10 will be able to spot you, and in return you're not going to spot them until you've covered that distance. And that gives the enemy team ample time to really start laying on the pressure towards you. But you can use that to your advantage. We have been spotted by an enemy destroyer making its way towards objective Bravo, and I'm hanging off of the objective right now to let the enemy team take shots at me, as I was being targeted by 6 enemy ships before becoming briefly unspotted. And in particular, revealing the position of the Buffalo from them shooting at me is important in giving my teammates knowledge of what's going on, particularly our Shimakaze, who now knows, sitting in the northern portion of objective Bravo, there's going to be a radar set coming their way in the form of that Buffalo, so they can start to plan accordingly. And so can my teammates in terms of planning where they want to position themselves and which targets to select. And the Buffalo is going to be there in the smoke screen south of Bravo, and there's also the Kurfürst and the Yamato heading this way, although it looks as though the enemy Kurfürst is actually making its way towards objective Alpha. Then putting away, another aspect to think about with this destroyer is its top speed of 43 knots as standard, or it can go above 45 knots with the speed boost consumable active, and with speed flags you're only going to push this threshold even further. You can use this to quickly relocate yourself around the battlefield, and what this means is you can go from one position to crop up on a flank and really start to lay in the pressure to exposed enemy ships. And I'd like to try and punish this enemy Mokumi's broadside as they're making their way southeasterly upwards towards Bravo. The logic behind this is that as the Mogami comes out of their position and we make our way around onto the eastern flank, I can lay armour piercing into their broadside, and what with their lack of armour, that means that light cruiser is really going to start taking some damage. The initial salvo there alone taking off 3,500 HP. The only reason I've gone for objective Charlie is because I noticed on the minimap as I was migrating towards this objective, it wasn't being taken by an enemy ship, and that means most likely, what with 3 minutes having passed, the enemy destroyers are not prioritising objective Charlie. So this means I don't have to worry about the issue of contesting a cap versus an enemy destroyer in the early stages for a little bit of map awareness. In return, this means I can continue to punish the Mogami. I don't have to worry too much about the Des Moines that's by itself, southeast of Charlie as such. As we'll see, they've moved behind the landmass, giving us a little bit more of an opportunity to hit this Mogami for some more health. And now I'm going to stop firing and head in towards standard concealment. Now the importance of this is I'm tapping into the destroyer quality of concealment at this point to take an objective. Because note how our team's already lost 3 ships to the enemy's 1, and this means we're at a severe points deficit, and we need to get an objective on the board to start getting some points back. If I continue firing, I'm going to be spotting myself for the enemy Des Moines behind the landmass to continuously throw an armour piercing salvo after armour piercing salvo, and that's something I cannot afford, hence why I've gone gun silent. On top of that, whilst this is a gunboat, you have to consider it's not always good to just hold down the trigger and keep firing. Every so often you need to go silent or get out of detection so that way you can use your heal. And this blends in with the gunboat style of play even more, in the fact that because you want to be a continuous thorn in the enemy team's side, you need to be able to get the most out of your health pool, which as standard is 22,500, with survivability experts, what you're seeing here, it goes up to 26,000, and then with the addition of the light heal, you can really start to push your health pool, what are the healing flag, and on top of that superintendent giving you 1 additional healing charge, you can push your health pool up to say 35,000 if not more. and therefore you become one of those long duration ships, already reiterating what we talked about at the very start of this review in the fact that this is about longevity, not having that sudden impact. You want to be something that's always a present threat to the enemy team, or something they have to keep in mind. That Khabarovsk, they last saw it on 7,000 health, now it's back up to 15,000 health, and they have to go through that whole process of getting the health pool down once more. Then having these rest periods, it also gives you the opportunity to think about where to position yourself best next. And what you can see is, with our team now having 2 objectives to the enemy's 1, the enemy team will need to push primarily from Alpha in towards Bravo. And this is where I can use the speed of this ship to relocate and start to punish some exposed enemy battleships, in particular the enemy Yamato, that has no cruiser or destroyer in front of it from what I understand from game reading at this point. So in return, what that means is I can start to sail into the open water of Bravo and just lay on salvo after salvo to try and set them on fire and help bleed their health down. So let's talk about the guns. You have 4 twin 130mm artillery pieces mounted in an ABXY configuration. Your high explosive alpha is 1900, which is rather nice, particularly when going up against enemy destroyers, more on that in a bit. And your raw armour piercing alpha is 2600, which leads to those punishing broadside salvos against light cruisers in particular, as we saw earlier. Your fire chance can be pushed all the way up to 11% with Demolition Expert, and on top of that the appropriate flags, and that's what we're going to be exploiting here to set multiple fires on the enemy Yamato, force them to use their damage control party consumable, and then set another fire hopefully to bleed even more health off of that ship. And in return, with the additional damage that's coming in from our teammates, it means that that enemy battleship will fall rather rapidly in terms of health pool. But this is something you need to keep in mind. Imagine if it was just me shooting that enemy battleship right now. I cannot afford to become locked on mentally to just shooting at this one enemy ship. Because whilst it's good to set fires on enemy battleship and bleed their health down over time as we're doing, you have to keep in mind it's a long-winded process, because at the end of the day you only have 8 130mm caliber guns. You do not have 8-inch guns, 10-inch guns, etc. So you can cause bleed damage over time, but it's not an excuse for you to become addicted to a single target, which is why I'm getting ready to switch my focus to the enemy Shimakaze and the enemy Grosser Kurfürst that are making their way across what would be effectively the eastern side of Alpha and contemplating that push in towards Bravo. Now the Shimakaze going into its smoke gives me the opportunity to open fire on the Kurfürst and sprinkle some shells in, and what with them opening fire as well, it means they're going to be revealed for a little bit longer rather than affording themselves the concealment of the smoke screen, but now they've picked it up. In tossing in salve after salve, we're hoping to get a fire on the Kurfürst, but it's not materialised. We do still, however, by the looks of things, have a fire on the Yamato, and that's going to help burn them to death as they're about to fall, and we can start to pull back. Now note here I'm not being aggressive, because again I cannot afford to do what a destroyer might do in this instance, which is pushing towards the smoke screens. Instead I have to pull back and think to myself, right, where's the next encounter going to be and how do I position myself to have that threat? Because again I'm at a difficult position here in the fact if the enemy destroyers decide to push out of their smokes, it means I've got to force my way into an engagement where the enemy's concealment will work to their advantage, much like at the very start. However, what I intend to do is pull back and give the enemy team space to push into Bravo, because if they decide to push into Bravo out of perhaps desperation to take the objective, they may be inclined under pressure to use their smoke screens in order to conceal their positions, and therefore I can use the enemy's smoke to push close to their positions and take away the weakness of concealment on my own ship. And you can see here with a fire being set on my ship, I don't really care about the fire burning because I can use the hill to offset that. And that's something important again about the damage control in this ship, in terms of knowing when to heal versus when not to heal. And in pulling further and further back, I've got the ability to get the enemy Minotaur in range to shoot at, because what you have to consider is that the gun range on the ship is very strong, with advanced firing train taking your gun range up to 13.5 kilometers, and with your maximum dispersion at this distance being 108 meters on your shells, what this effectively means is you can reliably hit even more maneuverable targets, at extreme distances. But here now I'm going to become a little bit more aggressive, because what I can see is exactly what materialised earlier. The enemy team have given their destroyers space to push into Bravo, and by pushing after the destroyers, such as the Ognavoy, they've put themselves into a position where they need to go to smoke to try and take this objective off of us. The Ognavoy in particular, and it looks as though the enemy Shimakaze has pushed in, not anticipating I'd be ready to counter this. So I'm going to use the one destroyer type asset I do have in the ship now, which is the 6-kilometer torpedoes, to try and snuff that Ognavoy out of their smoke. In the meantime, switch into the Shimakaze to really unleash the raw high explosive alpha DPM on the Shimakaze. As you can see here, they just fall apart under sustained pressure. Whilst our torpedoes only have 6 kilometers range, if they do hit a target, they'll do 19,500 maximum damage, They're rather slow in terms of moving forward, only a top speed of what is 53 knots, but they're only seen at a distance of 0.6 kilometers as standard. I mean, that Ognavoy in their smokescreen is about to have a surprise. Boom, a double strike on 2 enemy destroyers, and already this turns the tables in the contest of Bravo again. Because whilst we weren't able to act as a destroyer to win that engagement, what we did is use our gunboat properties to rip apart the Shimakaze, and we tapped into our destroyer asset, which was our torpedoes being available to us in order to take out the destroyer that used its smoke to try and hide themselves from us and shoot at us without us being able to shoot back. That's the thing, as we tap into those resources, that's where our lethality comes in. Now, so at this point, note how much health I've lost in those engagements. I have to start pulling back, because if I stay here any longer, I'll start to fall apart once again. And I decided to use my damage control party here to make sure I've got my engine and my steering available so I can continue to pull back. Now, the enemy gearing in their smokescreen for the time being, I know I cannot possibly push towards that smoke, because I haven't got the health pool to do so. I'm in a non-aggressive stance now, because I've used my heal, it's about to finish, my speed boost is about to end. I need to give myself some space. And you note here I'm trying to angle my ship, because whilst the Khabarovsk has an interesting 50mm side armour plate that runs along the majority of the ship, consider that because it's so thick compared to the armour you'll see on a destroyer typically around the 20mm mark, from what I recall, that means that armour piercing shells from enemy destroyers have the ability to fuse and therefore penetrate when they hit your broadside rather than over penetrate. But here, still being detected despite going to my standard concealment, it means I still cannot afford to push too far forward. Although I'm gearing myself up to potentially charge down the gearing in their smoke with a number of torpedoes coming in off of my port side. And what I'm thinking to myself at this point is, with my heal only being 40 seconds away, perhaps I can afford to be a little bit more aggressive than I might perhaps anticipate. The Montana's opening fire were a reasonable angle to avoid their incoming fire. They didn't give the appropriate amount of lead. And now that I'm no longer being spotted, I definitely know I can push forward. As in, the gearing has cut itself off from the observation devices of their teammates, and by going towards the smoke they'll feel that they're fine at the moment because they don't have to worry about me pushing forward. But now I'm going to look torpedoes to snuff them out of that smoke screen, and if they decide to retreat out of that smoke screen, I've closed enough distance now that I will be able to see that destroyer if our Shimakaze's not seeing them in the first place. And this is where you use your speed once again to close that ground, and we're right on the bubble of getting the gearing in spotting distance, which means here we can absolutely tear them to pieces, much like we did with the Shimakaze earlier. And in the end, they'll fall, and that's going to be another destroyer off of the enemy team's sheet. Now, unfortunately, we did lose our Shimakaze there, and I have to immediately get myself ready for what could possibly happen. And the key one is that gearing could have launched torpedoes towards me. And what you have to keep in mind is, even with the steering gears mod, and on top of the rudder shift mod, the rudder shift time on this ship, as you'll see, is 5.3 seconds. And with the long profile of this ship and its turn circle radius of 760 meters, close range, knife fighting and maneuverability is not your forte. So you always have to think in advance, would somebody have launched torpedoes towards me? Because by the time you spot them, unless you have the vigilance captain skill, it's probably going to be too late. And here we're definitely not running vigilance, not as part of our build. Coming back to the torpedoes as well, one thing to consider about the torpedoes is because you have 2 pentacle sets, what it means is you can saturate areas and you can perform ambush maneuvers, albeit I prefer not to use ambushing maneuvers with the torpedoes on the ship, because I think setting up an ambush really takes away the time and your ability to get the gunpowder out in the ship. But never underestimate the power of your torpedoes when the right circumstances arrive, as we finish off this Admiral Hipper for kill number 4, seeing the lethality of our armour piercing once again on their broadside for a brief period of time. And that's all it sometimes takes, is just a brief period to continuously dump out the fire, and with us being optimised for our reload speed, bring it down to 4 seconds thanks to basic firing training, and on top of that the reload module, you can really do so. Now here what you're going to see is I'm not going to resort to using my damage control party, because I feel that this game is not won yet, although the enemy Montana is quite a short distance away from death, and rather than rush to try and pick up my Kraken, instead I'm just going to let the Montana fall to the pressure of our Kagera and our Zao, being in a position to ambush them around what would be effectively the western side of Objective Bravo if they decide to move around this way to try and take it and put pressure on me, alternatively just escape our 2 ships pushing in from their northern side. I don't have to feel a rush to take out this ship. Other players may rush to try and get the Kraken, not for me, I'd rather just win. And you can see here I'm trying to set up an ambush with the torpedoes, so if the Montana does come charging around, they'll go straight into a screen of torpedoes and will only likely need 1 to sink that battleship. Now, one other thing to note as well in terms of the Khabarovsk nature, you'll see that we did try to bring down the spotting plane of the Montana. The AA is not too great on the ship. It does have a very nice range on the long range aura of 6.2 kilometers with 59 damage per second. Then you have a medium range aura of 4.2 kilometers with 81 damage per second. And you finally have a short range aura of 1.4 kilometers with 17 damage per second. But the AA is not going to do too well, and you don't have access, from what I recall, to the defensive AA consumable, unlike a Girin or the Grozavoy, the other tier 10 Soviet destroyer. But at this point, with the enemy Montana having sunk, the points advantage is well in our team's favour now, and it's really just a case of letting the game conclude. And therefore, we're now going to jump on to the post-game stat screen, because you're not going to see any more action from me. So as part of our victory, we can see that our battle performance amounted to a damage output of 123,970 HP, and along the way we picked up 3 achievements. The Heroic Achievement of Confederate for damage at least 6 enemy ships, where damage caused to each ship must exceed 20% of their normal health pool. The Standard Achievement of Double Strike for destroying 2 enemy ships, where the second target must be destroyed within 10 seconds after the first one. And we also picked up the Heroic Achievement of Dreadnought for receiving damage exceeding 120% of our ship's normal health pool from 4 or more enemy ships and survived the battle. In coming on to the team scores, we can see that we topped our team in terms of base experience earned, picking up 2,222. This was primarily through the application of the ship as a gunboat, tapping into its destroyer properties as the situations arose, whether it be using its concealment to take Objective Charlie, or alternatively using its torpedoes to flush out the Ognavoy that tried to retake Bravo when the enemy team made a push out of Alpha. But one area of frustration I have found with this ship, and you may find as well, is that sometimes your team will demand that you act as a dedicated destroyer in order to hunt down enemy destroyers in open water which have the superior concealment by a huge margin, such as an enemy Shimakaze or an enemy Gearing. And the difficulty with this is, it's understandable the anguish that your teammates will feel in that you're not taking on that destroyer hunting role, and you're not trying to use the ship as a destroyer as it's labelled in game. But in doing so, particularly in the wrong circumstances, i.e. open water engagements where those enemy destroyers have ample support from cruisers and battleships, it can really cost you the health pool of your ship and means that you lose the ability to conduct health management as we try to adhere to over the course of this gameplay. Instead, using the smoke screens deployed by the enemy ships and using the interludes between the engagements around Bravo to close down that distance and move into the destroyer hunter role for a brief period of time. And sometimes you just need to manage that and remember that if you act as a gunboat in the first instance and then bring in the destroyer principles over time, you can still have that desired impact to your team. Your team may lose 1 or 2 ships in the process, but you can still be a key contribution to your team's success, albeit not in the vein that your teammates would expect to see. In coming on to our detailed report, we have 3 key items to note here. The first is the damage we received, i.e. 36,089 HP. That's 10,089 more than the starting health pool of our ship, and goes to emphasise the importance of longevity in the ship and trying to use your heal to manage that longevity through tanking some damage and then pulling back using your heal and then getting back into the fight again. And in turn, what this means is the enemy team becomes frustrated at their inability to get rid of that Khabarovsk that seems to always be present on the map when it's least convenient for the enemy team. Item number 2 is the balance of main battery damage recalls of 95,327, where we can see 2/3 of it was high explosive, but at the same time we fired 5 times more high explosive shells approximately than we did armour piercing shells. And this serves to demonstrate the potency of using your armour piercing against the right targets giving broadside, high cruisers and battleships, as well as continuously spamming high explosive to do raw alpha damage and set fires. And do keep in mind the initial muzzle velocity of both your high explosive and armour piercing shells is 900 meters per second, and whilst the muzzle velocity of your shells will drop off beyond 10 kilometers considerably, it's not too punishing and you can lead some rather manoeuvrable ships out to your maximum range rather well. I mean, these guns are a pleasure to use all the way out to their maximum distance. The final item is in the team play category, damage upon your spotting, 63,299. This goes to show that whilst the Khabarovsk may not be a frontline destroyer, you can deploy it as a gunboat on the front line to spot enemy ships, garner their attention, such as the Buffalo at the start, and therefore your teammates get the ability to shoot at targets they otherwise would not have the chance to shoot at. And that's one thing you can keep in mind. You can become a real problem to the enemy team in the fact that you keep firing on them, and when they decide to fire back, they're revealing themselves to your teammates to shoot back. Alternatively, in the first instance, just by you being there and spotting the enemy team, you're that problem the enemy team has to get rid of, simply because otherwise they're going to be prone to your teammates opening fire on them. And finally, coming on to our credits and experience earned, we can see that after additions and deductions, we walked to have 474,558 silver credits and 10,100 commander experience. To conclude, if I had to summarise the Khabarovsk in a single phrase, it would be gunboat first, destroyer second. At its heart, this ship is a dedicated gunboat, which can tap into some destroyer qualities that it has when the situation calls for it, whether it be the deployment of its torpedoes or the usage of its light cruiser-like concealment in order to be able to take objectives or get closer to the enemy team. The downside, of course, is that when your team needs a dedicated destroyer, you're not going to be well suited to that role, meaning that hunting down enemy destroyers in open water in particular will be difficult and is going to put you at a severe disadvantage when those enemy destroyers have supporting cruisers and battleships. And whilst you have a large potential health pool that's pushing up towards 40,000, keep in mind that it's a potential health pool, not a fixed health pool on the ship. Your fixed health pool of survivability expert is 26,000, and therefore you need to manage your health accordingly in order to have that long-term impact in the game. But manage it well and you'll become a thorn in the enemy's side, and it means that you're always going to be there when the enemy team least wants you to, and you're a major source of inconvenience. And so I've been TX141, and if you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future World of Warships videos on my channel. And if you're looking to get into World of Warships today, ladies and gentlemen, as you haven't already signed up, feel free to do so using the link in the description of this video. I can assure you it's a fantastic game at its core, and it's well worth playing if you're into this sort of stuff. But until next time, as always, ladies and gentlemen, take care and fair seas.